Hey, what's up, everybody? This is going to be a video with my brother again because it's Thanksgiving weekend. So we're going to talk about the highly anticipated Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels documentary slash DVD. You had the sit-down interview with Bret and Shawn, and extremely well done, very inspiring story. It's kind of it's weird because reading Bret's book and reading Shawn's book and the Wrestling with Shadows documentary and giving all the bad blood. I never really thought you would ever see something like this. I'm not so sure how much of it was an act or if they really had to suck it up to get this thing done. But it came out pretty genuine. I really enjoyed it. So, what did you think about the Bret and Shawn?
What did I think about the DVD? I mean, the DVD as a whole, I thought was pretty awesome. I think it was great that it was just the two of them sitting across from JR, and I wouldn't be surprised if Bret and Shawn even requested that JR be the one to sit down and interview them. I really thought it was a great opportunity for them to really get the truth out about how things were going at the time. It was nice on one hand because you got to see things that they agreed on through the years. You got to see things that they disagreed on. You got to see both guys, Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels. You got to see what they still don't completely agree on, and you heard. It's fun to see how Shawn Michaels communicates and how Bret Hart communicates. Bret Hart, it sounds like he still has his like the way he talks. He still has his beliefs about how the Hitman was this hero that couldn't die, and he wanted his respect. He wasn't getting his respect. He still talks like that. He still carries a little bit of that around with him, and I think some of it is done with and healed, but he still carries it around. And Shawn Michaels, even though he's born again, and even though they've been able to come to an agreement, and they've been able to reconnect and put a lot of that behind them, he still disagrees with Bret Hart on all the things, the sort of doing things that's non-traditional back then, doing things like, for example, when Bret Hart said he'd pull his pants down to the pubic line, and that he'd dance with kids in the ring. Bret Hart's like, that's just not good for kids, and Shawn Michaels is like, what's the big deal? They're always going to. It's fun to see. It's fun to know. They're always going to disagree on many of those things, and that was fun to watch, because no matter how much you try to sugarcoat something, both these men will always disagree on certain things on some level. So.
I have to give Shawn Michaels a lot of credit because Bret Hart was extremely honest. He pretty much said everything that he's been saying for the last 10 years, and I felt like Shawn really took it. And you thought Shawn came off kind of nervous though in some situations?
He stuttered. I felt like Shawn stuttered a lot, and he wasn't sure how to react in some moments, because Bret Hart was kind of, like I said, it's almost like he had that stuff rehearsed for 10 years, kind of like still carrying that stuff around with him, and it almost sounded to me like Shawn Michaels, like, I think Shawn Michaels, some of it felt to me like it's almost like Bret Hart or some kind of, they were expecting Shawn Michaels to just be sorry about some of this stuff, and I think Shawn Michaels is sorry about some of the shots he took at Bret Hart back in the day, but you can tell that it's almost like, what? There's still that old Shawn in there somewhere. That old Shawn, that DX Shawn, that kick you in the face, stab you in the heart and twist Shawn is still in there somewhere. And I could see it. I could see he wasn't quite ready to just say, "Oh yeah, you're right, Bret," and where, and honestly, Bret Hart took shots at Shawn, and Shawn took shots at Bret, and it sounded like there were a lot of, hurt feelings there between the two guys, where, and that might sound kind of cheesy, guys, but the truth is, in the wrestling business, the best performers have to work together as a team. We all know that, because we know it's a show, and we know that the best performers really have to work together. And when they did work together, it was gold. And when they didn't work together, it was chaos. It was a shit show. and it was throwing shit at each other back and forth, sunny days comments and things like that. And I think a lot of that hurt still was, you could see that some of it was still left over, and this was a chance for them to sort of talk it out and play it out. I think Bret had some tears. Bret got emotional, and I think there was some. I think Shawn felt a little bit of guilt on some part, but there were also sections where it was like Shawn felt like, I shouldn't feel guilty about this. There was, and to his credit, I think it was, the guilt goes on both sides with everything happening. The screw job, it took more than Shawn Michaels and Vince McMahon and Triple H to make the screw job happen. It also took, a very stubborn, and you might even say selfish, Bret the Hitman Hart.
Well, I think both of these guys, deep down inside, I think they really have to appreciate one another, because I don't think they couldn't have gotten done without each other. I mean, they pretty much broke the barrier. I mean, when they were coming up, it was still a big man's industry, and I think both guys were probably the two guys that really shattered that glass ceiling of, the small guy can't really succeed in this business. But I don't know. It seemed like at first Shawn was really frustrated with the size issue, right?
Oh yeah, I think he was. He mentioned that, and I think Bret. It's great that Bret was sort of given the flag back in '92, '93 to carry and say, wait, look, this guy. We don't have to have a 6'8", or 7-foot giant with big muscles to come in and be our champion. I think Bret was the first one to sort of break down that barrier, and I think it is kind of nice how Shawn Michaels, after that, guys like Shawn Michaels came along and they, even further broke down the barrier. I thought that was beautiful. And the one thing I look at is saying, okay, Bret Hart was great. I can't think, if for people who are kind of looking at them as wrestlers, I've always thought that Bret Hart was at his best in like 92, like 91, 92.
Right.
And he was great. He had great matches in the mid-90s too, but I never felt like he got any better than when he was in 92. I never felt like he improved his performance.
Yeah.
He continued to have great matches, but I never felt like he improved his performance, whereas Shawn, in my opinion, never stopped improving. And that's why Shawn surpassed Bret Hart.
Well, I think a lot of that had to do with age. I think, when Bret won the IC title, he was already, like 32, 33?
Uh-huh.
So, I mean, at that point, your body's not going to get any more, athletic than what it was. Shawn had a lot of baby fat at the time, so you could definitely see his body mature and his athleticism grow and his, ring psychology get better throughout those years. So I think that's why.
Yes.
What was I going to say? I think the thing is, I think Bret was very, I want to say, kind of scared of losing his spot to Shawn. I really think. I think when they started pushing Shawn as the next big babyface, I think Bret started to get a little bit insecure. But at the same time, I think Shawn really wanted Bret to just give him the torch and run with it. And at the same time, Bret didn't want to do that.
Right. And I'm glad you brought that up, because there's this kind of talk from Bret that he said he was sort of ready to, give Shawn that torch, and he was trying to help Vince and everybody to make Shawn. His words, we're gonna make Shawn. I don't know how genuine that is. And by the way, Bret also sort of talks about how they were gonna do this, rematch at WrestleMania 13. And that, who knows, it would lead to
even bigger match.
Shawn and Bret having matches over the next 10 years. Like, it's going to be this ideal situation.
Well, I mean, from Bret's point of view, he was looking out for himself. Obviously, if they gave Shawn the belt to run with it for good, then what does Bret do? How is Bret going to, still make the kind of money that he was making? So, I mean, Bret had he did the logical thing. His thoughts were very logical, but I don't know, Shawn, at the same time, Shawn wanted to be the guy. I think he wanted an even longer title reign. And I think when he saw that you had so many egos going on, I think Shawn kind of, became, just complacent with what he already did and kind of just wanted to move on and get out of that.
I think they were both insecure. And Shawn even mentioned validation. He said he wanted that validation. He even mentioned it in his Hall of Fame speech. He wanted validation from Bret. He wanted it from Vince. He wanted it from the fans and the boys in the back. And no matter how hard he worked, he was the biggest perfectionist. And if he would say so himself, he was the biggest perfectionist. No matter how good he was, it was never enough. It was never enough to validate him as this performer.
All right. So Survivor Series is coming up, and obviously during that time, the thing we didn't talk about was they actually came to a mutual agreement after WrestleMania 12 to start hitting each other really hard. And Bret said that he did it in such a way that Shawn, even though they agreed on it, Shawn would still get pissed, and vice versa. I guess Shawn was taking a little bit too far with some of the things he would say, but when Bret would say it, even though they agreed on it, you just felt like Bret really meant it, and I think he did. I think he was very I don't want to say jealous, but just very, Shawn was just the total opposite of Bret. He was, Shawn was like the non-traditionalist. He's going to take it to the next generation. So obviously, there's just even though they were the two small guys that broke the barriers, there was just a lot of, different characteristics with both guys. But leading up to Survivor Series, I think that the dumb thing that Shawn did, obviously if you say this to somebody, why should Bret have wanted to do the job? He said, if like, fine, you're willing to put me over, but I want to let you know, Bret, I'm not going to do the same thing for you. I mean, that's a total slap in the face, and I think anyone else would have felt the same way. So I think that was Shawn just being just an asshole at the time.
And that's interesting to me because on the DVD, Shawn Michaels, from what I remember, he didn't really comment on that, and that was one of the points where he kind of stuttered. He didn't say much when Bret said, "You wouldn't, but I won't do the same thing for you." Bret told that story, and Shawn Michaels' reaction, I wasn't impressed. Like I expected him to say, like, it didn't exactly go down that way. And I would be interested to hear if Shawn's perception of that conversation went a little bit differently. But like you just said, on the DVD, Bret Hart kind of made it clear. His perception of it was Shawn wouldn't do the job for him. And so, yeah, that is a slap in the face, and that does hurt. And I think in the wrestling business, whenever there's a feud and guys are going back and forth at each other and they're trying to get heat and they want it to feel real, there's that sort of like half show, half reality, half fantasy, half reality thing going on, where sometimes you want to say, like, okay, this is part of the show, but then on the other end, it's like, how much of this is really, how much feelings are actually being hurt here, how much is actually, what's actually real. And I think that blur is sort of what caused the confusion and caused the conflict that ultimately led up to just exploding at the screw job at Survivor
Series. I mean, the whole screw job, obviously, I think there's regrets on everyone's part. I think the whole thing was idiotic, but it had to happen, and I think it was a blessing in disguise, at least for the WWF and the Vince McMahon character. But I don't know, man. I just think, with Bret and Shawn, I think, look at these two guys, and look at a guy like Stone Cold Steve Austin as well. I mean, look at their personalities. I think they cared too much about their characters, and they live those characters, which I think is something that's missing in wrestling today. Like, when I look at a guy like Dolph Ziggler or Jack Swagger, I feel like they don't really live their character. I feel like they wrestle for World Wrestling Entertainment. They get a paycheck from World Wrestling Entertainment. In other words, where Bret the Hitman Hart, like, that's him. He wrestles for himself. He's doing this because he believes in it. So I think, I think they just cared way too much to the point where there was just such an explosion of egos that, that was how it was going to go down, But these are two extremely talented wrestlers, and I'm very happy that they made up. I love what Bret said about the Undertaker Shawn Michaels match from WrestleMania. That it kind of inspired him to snap out of it and end things on good terms. And these two guys have so much in common, and they've accomplished so much. The company would be out of business if it wasn't for both of them, and for them to make up, and for them to, you really feel like that. I feel bad for Bret because he lost so many friends throughout the years. Shawn's pretty much like the last guy that's alive, like from that golden era, like that has something in common with Bret. And so I'm just happy for Bret that at least he has someone to talk to. He could talk about his old matches and just talk about old moments and past glories and everything. So I'm very happy both of them, made up?
Two of the greatest performers, two of the greatest icons, and two of my idols growing up. Really, I didn't become a professional wrestler, but I am a performer. I do have a band called Infinity Fall, and when I perform, the first person I think of